join me in welcoming and bringing to the stage the founder, chairman, and inspiration of Slow Money, WoodyTasch.
Thank you, Michael. And Nick, that was really beautiful review on it. So, there's supposed to be a slide. Let's try this. Let's see what happens. There we go. Some of you are getting sick of this slide, I know, but I never get sick of it. So I'm going to start today, as I often do, with this pig, but first I wanted to share a few thoughts, just a few, prompted by Michael Pollan's new book, Cooked. I'll bet you some people in this room already have it and have looked at it, as well as by the events of the past few weeks, and then we'll get back to the pig and take it from there. Last week, I heard Michael Pollan on an interview on NPR, and he said, "Why have we allowed cooking, a critical human activity, to be outsourced to corporations?" I don't know if that means it's going to be a hard crowd or an easy crowd. He went on to list many benefits that accrue to us when we take back cooking from corporations, and one of them, you won't be surprised to hear, is slowing down. But I want to pose his question again, but this time refer to something else. Why have we allowed this critical human activity to get outsourced to corporations? And the activity I'm talking about is investing. And while there are obvious differences between starting a stew pot and managing a portfolio, it seems to me that the direction of Pollan's thinking is worth following. If we outsource investing, that is, if we give all our money to others whom we don't know very well, in whose hands it becomes other people's money. How many people here have heard that phrase, other people's money? Not that many, few. OPM, it's actually has initials, other people's money. That's what they call our money on Wall Street. That's one of the many reasons it becomes so easy for them to play with it. When we give all our money to others, then we are at risk of ending up with nothing more than other people's financial stew. Or should we call it other people's financial broth? You know, the kind of broth that is spoiled by too many cooks. It just so happens that on the same NPR program that featured Michael Pollan last week, there was also an author named David Rode, who has written a book called Beyond War, Reimagining American Influence in the New Middle East. He was asked about the keys to improving our foreign policy, and his answer was, the single best thing we can do is slow down and listen. It was an amazing comment. So on that morning, last week on NPR, all roads led to slow. Cooking is slow. Listening is slow. So let's listen to the opening of Michael Pollan's Cooked. At a certain point in the late middle of my life, I made the unexpected but happy discovery that the answer to several of the questions that most occupied me was in fact one and the same. Cook. Some of these questions were personal. For example, what was the single most important thing we could do as a family to improve our health and general well-being? And what would be a good way to better connect to my teenage son? Other questions were slightly more political in nature. For years, I had been trying to determine what is the most important thing an ordinary person can do to help reform the American food system, to make it healthier and more sustainable. Another related question is, how can people living in a highly specialized consumer economy reduce their sense of dependence and achieve a greater degree of self-sufficiency? And then there were the more philosophical questions. How in our everyday lives can we acquire a deeper understanding of the natural world and our species' peculiar role in it? You can always go to the woods to confront such questions, but I discovered, this is Michael Pollan, that even more interesting answers could be had simply by going to the kitchen. Pretty amazing. That's the introduction to his book. When he says that even more interesting answers can be found simply by going to the kitchen, you won't be surprised that I immediately think even more interesting answers can be found simply by going to our investment portfolios. Confronting the true extent to which our investments are benefiting from the depletion of aquifers in China, or the exploitation of laborers in Bangladesh, or the confinement of animals in Iowa. Pollan's reflection about his son prompted me to reflect about my father and my own personal connection to the issues we're here to address today. I grew up in New York suburbs in the 1950s. I hate to admit that. But it's okay. There are even older people in this room than I am. I won't name you, I'm tempted. I grew up in the New York suburbs in the 50s, playing on the lawn with my dad's World War II Army gear, his actual Army helmet and spade and canteen and the like. And then I went inside and played in the den with little plastic army men. This was very common in those days. It really was. How many people here had little army men when they were growing up? No wonder you're all here. It's probably 90% of the people in the US who played with army men are here today. Where am I here? We ate at an early McDonald's where I noticed a sign that read, "Over 10 million sold." That was in the about 1955, 56. I had an inchoate feeling that there was something funny about putting a number like this on a sign. I remember it, a vague sense that there was something funny about that number. For me, this was the generation of Swanson's TV dinners and The Twilight Zone and Wonder Bread. I don't know why I put The Twilight Zone between Swanson's TV dinners and Wonder Bread. Oh yes, Wonder Bread. You are looking at a body that was built strong 12 ways. No comments. I can report that Wonder Bread provided many wonderful opportunities for me to load it up with Oscar Mayer bologna and a slather of Hellmann's mayonnaise. By the way, I discovered the other day when I was poking around to do these remarks that in the 1920s, Wonder Bread advertised itself as slow baked. SLO apostrophe. I don't know why they didn't want the W. That's true, you can check it out. So that was my youth in the New York suburbs in the 50s. Looking back, I can see that it provided many lessons about what Wendell Berry has so rightly called the unsettling of America. Now, here I am, 50 plus years later. McDonald's is on its way to 1 trillion hamburgers. I'm a new resident of Boulder, filled no longer with Wonder Bread and bologna. It didn't say pause there. But rather with displaced affection that has been unable to root itself sufficiently in any one place. I've dug 5 different gardens beside 5 different homes in 5 different towns over the past 25 years. This makes me pretty much an average American statistically in terms of moving around. It also makes me appreciate the importance of place through the process of getting to know new ones, but more deeply through the sense of loss that I experienced each time I picked up and moved. As many of you know by now, sense of place is one of the cornerstones of the slow money principles. The others are care of the commons, carrying capacity, diversity, and nonviolence. Given the events of recent weeks, in particular the bombings in Boston, the explosion of the fertilizer plant in Texas, and the nuclear saber rattling in North Korea, I think we should spend at least a few minutes on the last of these cornerstones, nonviolence. But I'd like us to turn away from the overt violence that is on the front page and focus instead on the inherent violence of our everyday economic activities. This inherent economic violence gets expressed in people and places that are made expendable. It gets expressed in relationships that are subjugated to transactions. Transactions, I was supposed to say. It gets expressed in hundreds of millions of tons of pesticides. It gets expressed in the commercialization and commodification and monetization of every aspect of daily life. After the bombings, a reporter commented, "Events like this affect us after they've left our conscious minds. They linger outside of our conscious attention, but still affect us." So here are a few questions. What is the effect on our conscious attention of being a shareholder? What is the effect on our unconscious minds of absentee ownership? What is the effect on our unconscious doubts of $600 trillion of derivatives? What is the effect on our hearts of the Dow is up 75 points or down 75 points every time we turn on the radio, the TV, or the computer? What is the effect on soil fertility and community health of our money zooming around the planet, prioritizing global economic growth? All of which brings us around to where I was going to start today. Where's my pig? I need my pig. There we are. Whew, I feel better now. I was going to start by saying, welcome, fellow pig lovers and earthworms. Pig lovers, because how can you look at this cute little pig and not feel affection? When I stare this pig in the face, particularly this pig, a free-range capitalist pig, raised by the sustainable food company Nyman Ranch, I cannot escape the questions, how are my investments affecting the way food is produced, and how is the way food is produced affecting the natural world? So before we go further, join me in pausing for a moment and staring this pig in the face. Welcome, fellow pig lovers. And welcome to fellow earthworms, because we are all working in the soil of a new economy. An economy that strives to be based less on extraction and consumption and more on preservation and restoration. But there's another kind of creature with us here in this room today, something much bigger than an earthworm or a pig. There's an elephant in the room, and its name is fiduciary responsibility. What is this thing called fiduciary responsibility? If we go all the way back to its roots in ancient Rome, a fiducia was a pledge of property between a borrower and a lender. Zooming to mid-19th century America, the foundation of what would become known as the prudent man rule was laid down in Harvard College versus Amory in 1830. I was hoping the pig would stay up there most of the time, but Justice Samuel Putnam defined a trustee's responsibility. Let's have a round of applause for the pig. Justice Samuel Putnam defined a trustee's responsibility to, quote, observe how men of prudence, discretion, and intelligence manage their own affairs, not in regard to speculation, but in regard to the permanent disposition of their funds, considering the probable income as well as the probable safety of the capital to be invested, unquote. Let's keep zooming towards the present all the way to 1989. I am sitting in a New York City conference room at Alliance Capital, a multi-billion-dollar gatekeeper for the venture capital industry. My audience is one Tony Hoberman, an Alliance Capital partner, and he states, I have a moral obligation to my investors to maximize return and minimize risk. It would be a breach of my fiduciary responsibility to take any exogenous social or environmental factors into account. I'll never forget his use of the words moral and exogenous. For the fiduciary charged with allocating billions of dollars of venture capital, minimizing risk and maximizing return rises to the level of moral responsibility. Are we really to conclude that making less money due to the inclusion of social and environmental concerns is immoral? Or that keeping money zooming around the planet as fast as possible in the name of efficiency and competitive returns is synonymous with morality? If you hurt people deliberately, George Soros has said, that's immoral. If you break the law, that's immoral. If you play by the rules, then the market itself is amoral. I'm no expert in ethics, but it seems to me that a competent morality would widen our responsibility and affection rather than narrowing them. So when the stewards of the largest pools of capital on the planet put a veil of amorality around their decision-making, where does that leave us? Looking back, I can see now that the first seeds of what would one day become slow money were sown in those words of Tony Hoberman. I have a moral obligation to my investors to maximize return and minimize risk. It's been more than 24 years since that conversation, and during that time, the reign of 19th and 20th century concepts of fiduciary responsibility has continued unbroken. The grip of buy low, sell high has never been stronger. Television ads show infants in their cribs trading stock on their iPads, and I know we've all seen that ad. Anybody who has a TV has seen that. This is cute and funny up to a point, but up to another point, it is a horrible testimony to the colonization of every aspect of culture by the trading mentality. There has been significant progress in assets under management by socially responsible mutual funds and investment advisors, and some of the leaders of socially responsible investing and impact investing are in the room with us today. At the same time, the hegemony of the Dow Jones Industrial Average as the key measure of progress has never been greater. So at this point, I need to ask, how many people in this room have never heard Bobby Kennedy's quote about GNP and the Dow Jones Industrial Average and our economic well-being? How many people here have never heard the quote? I'm curious. Great. Most people have heard it, therefore I don't have to read it. But no, I'm not going to. But it may be the most beautiful thing. I've got too much other stuff to cover, and it's a long quote, but I'm going to direct you to it. If you haven't heard it, Google RFK and GNP. It is an amazing quote. It ends, I do have the last sentence in here. It says the Dow Jones Industrial Average can tell us everything about America except why we are proud to be Americans. I'm just telling you, you will not believe it if you've never read this quote. It is definitely the most profound articulation of the disconnect between economics and our well-being that any public figure has probably ever given in the United States, and he did it while he was running for president on the campaign trail. So please check it out. But let's keep going on our little journey through the land of fiduciary responsibility. And let's jump to the current day. John Bogle is the founder of the Vanguard Group, one of the world's largest investment management firms with some $2 trillion of assets. As many of you know, Vanguard was indeed at the vanguard of the creation of index funds, which are designed to buy the market with very low management fees. What's the premise? Well, it's not really a premise at this point, it's experience. It turns out far too many money managers don't beat the market by more than their management fees. I'm sure most people in this room are aware of that. That is, performance net of management fees is often lower than the market index against which that performance is measured. Does anybody realize how crazy that is? Okay. Why don't you all just shout, "That's crazy!" That's crazy! Good. Turns out these same problems accompany venture capital, the current venture capital. Given that we're here today to catalyze the flow of funding for a bunch of small private companies, or tomorrow, I should say, when the deals will be on the stage, it's important that we stare the little piggy of venture capital in the face. All right, are there any venture capitalists in the room? Oh, that's very disappointing. I know there are a few, at least, former venture capitalists in the room. We don't scapegoat people here. We really don't. Why isn't David Haynes in the room? David, if you're out there watching streaming, I'm mad at you for not being in the room. We're here planting the seeds of something called nurture capital. And we do so in the very large shadow cast by venture capital, whose high-flying, high-tech, capital-intensive methods tend to dominate our sense of the right way to invest in private companies. In May of 2012, the Kauffman Foundation published a report that made transparent the results of its experience investing in 100 venture capital funds over a period of decades. What was the conclusion of the report? The average venture capital fund fails to return investor capital after fees. That's crazy. Half of the venture capital funds in their portfolio, 50 funds, did not return their capital after fees. Nevertheless, here's what they conclude. This is a quote. The historic narrative of venture capital is a compelling story filled with entrepreneurial heroes, spectacular returns, and life-changing companies. The quest to invest in the next Google, can I always have trouble saying that, Google, guarantees that venture capital will retain its allure and glamour, even in the face of disappointing results. So the narrative is still so strong it captivates us. There's much we could deconstruct here about venture capital and the power of stories, but in the interest of time, let's just frame a choice. We can keep putting all our eggs in the basket of venture capital and high tech and globalization, or we can begin putting some of our eggs in the basket of nurture capital, an industry that doesn't quite exist yet, but which I believe we are in the process of seeding. If venture capital is a compelling story filled with entrepreneurial heroes and life-changing companies, then the story we are all writing here today and tomorrow, the story of nurture capital and the stories of the small food entrepreneurs who will grace this stage tomorrow, I think these stories are as compelling as the story of venture capital. Of course, you will all be the judge of that tomorrow. You guys better be good tomorrow, talking to the entrepreneurs. Which brings us back around to Vanguard founder John Bogle, whose decades of unparalleled fiduciary entrepreneurship have led him to conclusions about finance that make the Kauffman Foundation's report seem reserved. Bogle uses the word croupiers to describe financial intermediaries, and he calls the complexity of today's financial instruments a modern version of alchemy. Those are his words. In the Middle Ages, alchemy was about turning lead into gold. In today's world, alchemy is about turning our money into other people's money, then turning other people's money into bytes of information measured in milliseconds. Bogle concludes, by worshiping at the altar of numbers, these are his words, and by discounting the immeasurable, we have in effect created a numeric economy that can easily undermine the real one. I would remind you that Bogle is no academician or Occupy Wall Streeter. So this is where our journey through the history of fiduciary responsibility lands us, worshiping at the altar of numbers. It is more than, it's too depressing to just shout out, it's crazy. It's more depressing than that. No. Go ahead, you can say it's crazy. It is more than a little interesting that Bogle's comparison of the numeric economy to the real economy sounds downright Wendell Berry-esque. That's where it gets interesting. Berry writes about the differences between the human economy and what he calls the great economy. Listen to Wendell Berry. I'm going to have a few juicy Wendell Berry quotes here. The difference between the great economy and any human economy is pretty much the difference between the goose that laid the golden egg and the golden egg. For the goose to have value as a layer of golden eggs, she must be a live goose, and therefore joined to the life cycle, which means that she is joined to all manner of things, patterns, and processes that sooner or later surpass human comprehension. The golden egg, on the other hand, can be fully valued by humans according to kind, weight, and measure, but it will not hatch, and it cannot be eaten. To make the value of the egg fully accountable, then, we must make it golden. We must remove it from life. But if in our valuation of it, we wish to consider its relation to the goose, I love this phrase, we have to undertake a different kind of accounting, more exacting, if less exact. We are all here today working in the direction of a different kind of accounting, an accounting that is more exacting, if less exact. It's notable and hopeful that both Bogle and Berry point towards values that cannot be quantified. It is important that we see them as connected by a single greater purpose: the inventor of index funds and the poet farmer, the steward of trillions of dollars and the steward of millions of earthworms. Neither the financier alone nor the farmer alone can solve the great problems of our day. So long as Bogle speaks to one constituency and Berry to another, we will not discover a new kind of accounting. And such a new accounting requires a new conversation, one that is nuanced enough, exacting enough, to speak across the silos of expertise that separate us. We need a conversation not only between investors and farmers and fiduciaries and entrepreneurs, but a conversation between those very parts of ourselves, between the part of ourselves that is beholden as we sit here to buy low, sell high, and the part of ourselves that is trying to mature into a more responsible and engaged participant in the great economy. We need an authentic, nuanced public conversation about what's broken in the food system and the financial system, what's broken in our economy and in our culture. We want to speak in authentic, nuanced terms about both sides of the coin: industrial finance and industrial agriculture, GMOs and CBOs, fast food and slow food, fast money and slow money. This kind of conversation is what we've been hosting in gatherings large and small, local and national, around the country for the past few years, and I wanted to share with you this morning a few gems from those conversations around the country. Local is the distance the heart can travel. That's what Odessa Piper said after a roaring discussion in Madison about the difficulty defining local. Is it 50 miles, 100 miles, drivable in a day, a watershed, a bioregion? Local is the distance the heart can travel. A woman in Ashland, Oregon, whose name I'm sad to say I've not been able to recover, said this: "The innate value of this kind of investing is so obvious to me, I don't care how much money I make." We have John Fullerton with us today from the New Economics Institute. He's actually going to be up on the panel shortly. And I would say that if there's going to be a new economics, then it's going to have to include the concept of innate value. The innate value of this kind of investing is so obvious to me, I don't care how much money I make. What the heck kind of fiduciary responsibility is that? Or is it morality? Then there are the words of our dear friend Joan Gusso, who is blessing us with her presence today. Let's hear it for Joan. She's out there somewhere. Joan, I prefer butter to margarine because I trust cows more than I trust chemists. How about this from Greg Steltenpole, the founder of Odwalla, one of Slow Money's early founding members? This one is a little more controversial. We need to make entrepreneurs more like farmers, not make farmers more like entrepreneurs. Not too many investors would actually endorse that one, but we'll review that one as we go. One of Wes Jackson's neighbors in Salina, Kansas said the following: "Farmers are heroic, and they are also grunts." All the entrepreneurs we are going to see tomorrow on the stage have something of the heroic grunt in them. And if the heroic fiduciary grunt is among us, who will invest a few $1 million, well then, I'm all for heroic grunts, especially heroic fiduciary grunts. Then there's this bit of wisdom from Marco Evangelisti, who co-leads Slow Money's Northern California chapter. Marco says, "Systems are designed to optimize either for efficiency or diversity. We need finance that optimizes for diversity." I'm doing a lousy job of paraphrasing him, but he'll be up here this afternoon, later in the program, so you'll hear it better from him. One of my favorites comes from Elliot Coleman, who I'm proud to count as a Slow Money board member. Want to talk about returns? At 1,000 to 1 in 4 months, a tomato seed makes even the highest flyers seem paltry. It's a really beautiful thing. And while we're appreciating the gems of such authentic, nuanced conversation, let's throw in E.F. Schumacher, who wrote in Small is Beautiful, "The richer a society, the more difficult it becomes to do things that lack an immediate payoff." And while Schumacher is not with us in this room today, he is. David Orr has contributed many times and in many ways to this conversation, but let's just appreciate here his pithy description of entrepreneurship. "Hope is a verb with its sleeves rolled up." I didn't do that on purpose. And finally, this from one Carlo Petrini. Think about the period of the Renaissance, the period of the Enlightenment, when investors would invest in things of beauty. They left things to the world that were quite beautiful. Over the next 2 days, it is to the next stages of this kind of conversation that we will all have the opportunity to lend our voices. Because Carlo is here with us, I wanted to share a story. And a few of you were in the room when this occurred. I don't know if you remember it exactly the way I do. But Carlo was addressing an investor circle in San Francisco, a group of angel investors, over lunch. And as you will find out at the end of the day today, Carlo speaks Italian, and we'll have a translator translating for him. And he stood up and he said in Italian, "Our fate is in the hands of idiots." Now, you're going to see what a bad imitation of Carlo that just was. Whether he was referring to certain national political leaders or the management of companies that make GMOs and pesticides, I don't remember. But I do remember that in the same remarks, he listed brand names of herbicides and pesticides, commenting on how many of them incorporated overtly military references. Here are some brand names for pesticides and herbicides: Barricade, Brawl, Command, Guardsman, Gunslinger, Impact, kind of interesting, Marksman, Raptor, Squadron, Stealth, Surge, Vanquish, Everdeath, Doom, Fast Kill, Combat, and Bazooka. There is surely more than a little idiocy in a situation that provides financial incentives for the broad application of pesticides when less than 1% of these pesticides reach their targeted pests. Less than 1%. We could have a discussion about efficiency and diversity and violence in this regard, couldn't we? This kind of inefficiency is just one manifestation of even greater systemic economic inefficiencies. If the US consumes 25% of the world's resources but has only 5% of the world's population, we can hardly call the modern industrial economy efficient. If every day the global industrial economy consumes stored solar energy in the form of fossil fuels that it took 10,000 years to make, we can hardly call this efficient. But this didn't all come about because the people at the helm of industry are idiots. It came about because people who are just a bit too clever for the overall good of future generations. So, Carlo, I think you're in the room somewhere. I'd like to offer a friendly amendment to your diagnosis of our fate. Our fate is in the hands of experts. Our fate is in the hands of technologists. Our fate is in the hands of fundamentalists, by which I mean not only religious fundamentalists, but free market fundamentalists as well. Surely our fate is in the hands of military industrialists, even more than it was when President Eisenhower issued his prescient warning after World War II. and our fate is in the hands of fiduciaries. But if it is true that our fate is in all those hands, it is also true that we hold the seeds of a different future in our own hands. It's a future towards which the phrases slow money and nurture capital point. It's a future that will have fewer industrial farmers who spend only 45 minutes per year on each acre of their land. Just think about the process, what that means. That's right. The typical large-scale industrial corn and soybean farmer spends only 45 minutes a year on each acre of their land. What do you want to call that? Efficient agriculture? Fast? Crazy. Fast agriculture? Abusive agriculture. Phrases like fast agriculture and slow money and nurture capital and innate value, and maybe even heroic grunt, begin to give us a vocabulary with which we can have our new conversation. So in this spirit, in the spirit of not only seeking a new kind of accounting, but also of looking for new language, I would like to offer a new term today. I want to get down into the linguistic soil and get our hands dirty, and I want us to have a little fun, since economics is such a dismally dull science and humor a much-needed antidote. So, bear with me and entertain for a few playful moments the idea of turning the concept of fiduciary responsibility around all the way down to the very word itself. So here it is, a new term to contribute to our new conversation. That's not crazy. A few of us are here today as fiduciaries, but all of us are here today as budding fiduciaries. It's going to be really hard for me to get through the next part of this. Stick with me. It's not entirely inappropriate to opine, because I'm going to go back and forth between the serious and not quite so serious, that if we chase down fiduciary this and internal rate of return that, we get to the most fundamental struggle of all, the struggle between arithmetic and real life, the struggle between numbers and words. Here's how John Bogle puts it. Today in our society, in economics and in finance, we place far too much trust in numbers. Numbers are not reality. And in his book, that's in italics. Numbers are not reality. At best, they are a pale reflection of reality. At worst, they are a gross distortion of trust, wisdom, character, ethical values, and the hearts and souls of human beings who play a central role in all economic activity. Then he quotes Albert Einstein. I think many in this room have heard this quote. Not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. So, are we to find our way to a restorative economy merely by piling a new set of numbers, triple bottom line this and social return on investment that, alongside the old set of numbers? Or dare we go further? Dare we challenge the limits of quantitative analysis altogether? Could we ever, in the name of imagination and affection and place, assert the primacy of words over numbers? Now, before you go rushing for the exits, this is an investment conference, I would point out that more than 500,000 Americans are already doing this after a fashion. That's how many folks belong to CSAs around the country. I've asked many thousands of people, many hundreds of CSA members, over the past few years, how many of you ever calculated quantitative metrics supporting your decision to join the CSA? Oh, I'm glad you're laughing. Food miles, price, nutrient density, pesticide levels, organic matter in the soil, anything like that. In the 4 years of asking that question, only one person raised their hand. This means that hundreds of thousands of Americans are using a sense of innate value to prepay for food from a local farmer. They are entering into an arrangement that is part investment decision, part consumption decision, part transaction, part relationship, part capitalism, part socialism, both deeply conservative and deeply liberal. This is why I like to think of slow money as the CSA of investing. We're a network, a bunch of distributed relationships rather than a centralized fund. We're a bunch of reasons and intentions and values rather than a single technique or strategy. We're as non-fiduciary as possible, as direct, as disintermediated as possible. We want to spend more, lots more, than 45 minutes on each financial acre. And we want to turn fiduciary responsibility into something very different. So I want to return to Wendell Berry as our guide. Some of you may recognize the following passage from his seminal work, The Unsettling of America. I'll never forget reading this passage. When I first became chairman of Investor Circle, I read it, and the energy in the room was palpable. And I think the reason is that even though the word fiduciary does not appear in this passage, in it Wendell is looking into the heart of the investor. So here's the passage. I conceive a strip miner to be a model exploiter, and as a model nurturer, I take the old-fashioned idea or ideal of a farmer. The exploiter is a specialist and expert. The nurturer is not. The standard of the exploiter is efficiency. The standard of the nurturer is care. The exploiter's goal is money, profit. The nurturer's goal is health, his land's health, his own, his family's, his community's, his country's. Whereas the exploiter asks of a piece of land only how much and how quickly it can be made to produce, the nurturer asks a question that is much more complex and difficult. What is its carrying capacity? That is, how much can be taken from it without diminishing it? What can it produce dependably for an indefinite time? The exploiter typically serves an institution or organization. The nurturer serves land, household, community, place. The exploiter thinks in terms of numbers, quantities, hard facts. The nurturer in terms of character, condition, quality, kind. So with the deepest gratitude to Wendell, I hope I'm not offending you, Wendell, or Mary. Let's take a few steps forward from fiduciary to something not quite so serious, but just as important, fiduciary. A fiduciary, this is going to be hard for me to get through without stumbling. A fiduciary focuses on growing portfolios. A fiduciary focuses on growing food. A fiduciary minimizes risk and maximizes return. A fiduciary minimizes chemical additives and maximizes taste. A fiduciary seeks the straightest, shortest line between buying low and selling high. A fiduciary thinks seasonally, generationally, and embraces the cycles of life. A fiduciary thinks in terms of millions and billions of dollars. A fiduciary thinks in terms of household income and keeping the farm. A fiduciary believes in hockey sticks. From you, it'd be that way. Everybody know what a hockey stick is? Financial projections that zoom upward with no end in sight. A fiduciary believes in pitchforks, triple-tined and poised to enter the earth. A fiduciary knows the direction of his stocks. A fiduciary knows the whereabouts of her flocks. Thank you for chuckling. A fiduciary is an expert who strives to increase wealth. A fiduciary is an amateur who strives to improve health. There's nothing funny about a fiduciary, but being a fiduciary may not be all that funny either. At least it offers the potential for a little mirth and a warm heart. And this is why I love Slow Food and Carlo Petrini. Slow Food's commitment to culture and taste and the pleasures of the table warms the heart. And while it takes up nonviolent arms against many of the worst excesses of industrial agriculture, it also brings a smile to the face and something beautiful to the palate. This is the beauty of Slow Food, and Carlo, I hope it may also be the beauty of Slow Money. There is much that we are fighting against: GMOs, pesticides, endocrine disruptors, hunger, obese kids, ultra-fast trading, short-termism, soil erosion. We are fighting against food with empty calories and portfolios with empty profits. But there is more, much more that we are fighting for: health, conviviality, diversity, entrepreneurship, stewardship, sense of place, living wages, Frog Hollow peaches, Coyote Creek eggs, Jackrabbit Hill wine, Four Season Farm carrots, Cure Farm mustard greens, the black willows that line the Kentucky River near Port Royal, the orchards on the mesas south of Grand Mesa, wild blueberries on Chappie, the rebuilt barn at Shepherd's Way, the oysters of Willapa Bay, wild rice in the streams of the Menominee, feral bees, the pigness of the pig, to use Joel Salatin's wonderful phrase, happy earthworms, mycorrhizae, symbiosis, leaf, soil, root, peace. There is so much more to fight for than to fight against, and there is so much more to invest in. Admittedly, the $25 million, that's what we're up to as of yesterday, that has been invested in 200 small food enterprises over the past 3 years by Slow Money folks around the country, is only a beginning. There should be some applause at this point. But it is a beginning of which we should all be proud. It's only a beginning, but we should be proud of it. And it's a beginning marked by more than a little affection. Michael Brownlee mentioned biophilia. The phrase comes from E.O. Wilson, who gave us the phrase biodiversity. And one of the definitions is the innate affection humans feel for all other living organisms. Isn't that what we sense when we stare this pig in the face? If the idea of affection seems quaint or ineffectual given the challenges of the food system or the complexities of modern financial markets, then I say it is affection that will reconnect us to place, to the land in that place, to one another as inhabitants of that place, and to the food and farming enterprises that turn a place into a community. It is affection that will give us the gumption to take some of our money from over there, that abstraction called global financial markets, and put it to work here, near where we live, with our neighbors and things that we understand, starting with small food enterprises. And the nice thing about affection is that it cannot be outsourced. It is slow. It is nonviolent. So let's stare this pig in the face one last time. And if you would now take a moment, turn to the person next to you, shake hands, and say, "Welcome, fellow fiduciary. Let the affection begin." All right, that's enough fiduciaryizing. You can leave the lights up, please. That's a great sound. All right, so I'm done, except for just a few things that will segue us into the rest of the program. So thank you for letting me do that. I had a lot of thoughts I wanted to share, and so thank you. All right, there are more than 16 slow money chapters across the United States. I say more than 16 because at the retreat we just had over the weekend, we discovered that there were a whole bunch more than we had previously understood. Don't ask me what a chapter is. We also have 6 slow money investment clubs. They have some more structure. We know what they are. We have a new chapter in France and one likely to be formed in Australia. Raphael Souchier and Emmerich Young, where are you? You're here. They're here. Jerry Keogh, where are you? Jerry Keogh, you're here somewhere, aren't you? Jerry, where are you? She's probably jet lagged, but she's here from Australia. I would like to give a special shout out to our steering committee, Arno Hesse, Marco Evangelisti, Derek Denkla, Carol Pepe Hewitt, and Lindsay Weld. Will you all please stand? Will all the Slow Money Chapter and Investment Club leaders please stand? All Slow Money Chapter people, please stand. I don't know if you think $25 million into 190 deals over 3 years is a lot. It is a lot, and it's done all by volunteers, by those people. Where's Rory Holland? I don't know. We were talking last night. I just met him. And he said, yeah, $25 million, that's a lot. He said, that's like one venture capital deal. And when you think about it, think about how beautiful this is. One venture capital transaction, $25 million, or 190 beautiful little food deals all over the United States. The same money. Those of you who are involved with sister networks like Bally or Slow Food or Social Venture Partners or Transition Towns, you know how hard it is to manage and grow a network. So the applause you gave for these people means a ton. They totally deserve it. We have lots of co-creation, lots of innovation ahead of us, and I want to highlight 3 projects as examples. The first is Credibles, the forward payment system for small food enterprises developed by Arno, who will be speaking later today. The second is a new The second is a new model for our investment clubs, which to date have been organized as LLCs under SEC guidelines. In Aspen, Nashville, and Ashland, Oregon, folks are looking at an innovative nonprofit club model. Lindsay Weld, well, she already stood up, but she's going to be on the stage tomorrow talking about investment clubs. She organized the first one in Maine. And lastly, here's a little surprise, Gather Round, our new internet funding portal. We've been inching towards this for quite a while. With the help of a great bunch of folks, we're ready to take the next steps, which we look forward to sharing from this stage tomorrow afternoon. And I think I'll just leave it at that and just say there's an extraordinary level of collective intelligence and vision in this room. And I look forward to working with you all to turn that vision into life.